Good morning and welcome to Trinity Cathedral and the Dean's Forum. What a pleasure it is to see you all here this morning, and thrilled to be welcoming. I'm going to embarrass myself. Ian Morgan Cron.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to embarrass myself. I did it just great because I practiced with Lois. So glad that you are here, Ian, and Lois Annich is here as well. Ian Morgan Cron is a best-selling author, psychotherapist, Enneagram teacher, and Episcopal priest. He is the host of Typology, a podcast that explores the mystery of human personality and how we can use the Enneagram typing system, as a tool to become our most authentic selves. I'm going to see how long it takes Ian to hold up the number saying what he thinks I am. I'm sure you're probably good. It's probably not that hard. His most recent book is The Fix: How the 12 Steps offers a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. I actually missed the second part of that title, and then until I was coming back and remembered starting with the well-adjusted, down and out, and everyone in between. That's an important part of the book. Joining us for this conversation is the Reverend Lois Annich. You may know as a fixture on the front row of our Abundant Table service, but more importantly, no, there's no such thing, an ordained Presbyterian minister and leadership coach who has worked in the field of addictions as a chaplain, treatment unit director, and family chaplain. She serves on Trinity's Peace, Justice, and Mercy mission team. So with that, please welcome Ian and Lois. Welcome to the Dean's Forum.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We are getting a preview of a book that actually comes out on Tuesday. And Lois and I are both going to be asking Ian questions. And I guess we can just kind of go back and forth and choose our favorite ones. Before I jump in, I just want to say how much I appreciated your book, how much I appreciated your vulnerability, why I loved it. First of all, I locked in very early when you talked about Irish Catholics from New York. Was your grandfather's New Rochelle?
New Rochelle, yes.
Mine, Pops O, Queens Village.
Nice.
And I have a feeling in terms of like them getting together over martinis, it would look more like the Nathan's hot dog eating contest.
Yes.
As they dug into them. And I saw that and I joke about that, but I also have to name that there were devastating consequences on his generation, on the next generation, and on my generation. So I appreciated the story that you told, but we have to recognize the disease of alcoholism and addiction more broadly, and how it impacts all of us. It is something to take very seriously. We have to be human about it. We have to have compassion on ourselves. But, and this is where I really engage with the book, we have to honor the spiritual gifts that we find in recovery. So I want to thank you for what you wrote.
Thank you.
So to my mind, Ian, there are two books here. One is a practical spiritual book about addiction recovery. And then two is a book for all of us about addictive tendencies and behavior. How did you you may have been writing many books at once, but how did you hold these different overlapping stories in your mind as you wrote this?
Yeah, well, I thank you all, by the way, for being here and for your interest. So I just really wanted to write a book out of my own experience of the 12 steps in recovery that democratized the steps in such a way that anyone could derive the same benefits that I had, life-saving benefits, spiritual benefits, that, I was always, in fact, I said to a friend in recovery that day, I said, why should all the alcoholics and drug addicts have all the fun? Why can't we, and how many times in meetings have I heard someone say, gosh, I wish so-and-so had a program, and I'm like, well, why don't they? Like, why don't we get out of the basement of the church and kind of spread the news that anyone could work these steps and their lives could be deepened and enhanced through working them. So why not share them?
And I should ask you, I've read it, but it hasn't come out yet, so most of us have not. What is the key vision of the book?
Well, the key vision of the book is, I think precisely that, right? Like, let's also confront the reality that everybody's an addict. Now, we know that there's mild addiction, moderate and severe addictions, right? But I love what the beautiful, faith-filled Christian psychiatrist Gerald May once said. He said, "To be alive is to be addicted, and to be alive and addicted is to stand in need of grace." So addiction, we're not even just mono-addicted people. We're you are a seething cauldron of addictions. Okay, let's just have it out right here, right? And if you don't believe me...
Who are you looking directly at as you said that?
Well, I can pick out the real ones right away, okay? Because they all come in looking guilty from the go. But in all honesty, why don't we all just leave our cell phones at home for a day and see how we do? You'll be reaching for your phone every 5 seconds if it's not there. Right? It's part of, addictions are very complicated, but we could maybe as a working definition say that an addiction is an unhealthy, compulsive relationship with a person, a substance, or a behavior that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences. We continue to do it despite the negative effect it has on our well-being, right? So as a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, I just know that, I had to have a lot of negative consequences before I had my awakening, if you will. And I just wanted people to understand that it's just part of the human condition, that we need to normalize conversations about addiction. And I think that's a really important idea, right? Let's just normalize the conversation because it's not a those people problem.
Right.
It's an us problem. And actually, it's getting worse in the culture. Algorithmically worse.
Which, I'm going to jump in one more time and I'll turn over to Lois, which is opposite to the story that I think we hold in our minds, which is life was so much harder several generations ago, and we didn't all have therapy, and we didn't sort of know ourselves, and everybody drank and smoked themselves, and died at 57. And that thank God we're better now. And that generationally we are getting better. We're dealing with cycles of generational trauma, but maybe we're not.
Brene Brown has a great quote that I use in the book. She says, "We are the most addicted cohort in human history."
Wow.
So, what did COVID do to us? What does the loneliness epidemic do to us? Addictions breed in isolation, right? Which is part of the magic of the 12 steps, right? Which is, again, a mantra we hear often, right? Which is we get sick alone and we get well together. We get sick alone and we get well together. And so there are, the opioid crisis. It's just the technology crisis, gaming, sports betting. If you're not addicted now, you're just one click away on your computer. You know what I mean? Porn, sex addictions, codependency, relationship. There's a list in the book, actually, that's fairly lengthy. A little, but it's just a way of saying it's an us problem. And it's a spiritual problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Lois?
Yes. I have a bunch of questions for you, Ian, as you know.
Beginning with, how did you write this nonsense?
Well, actually, that's true. Can you tell us something about the call that you felt to write this book?
That's a good question. All of my books that I've written all begin with a lump in the throat. That's what I like to say. I don't write anything that doesn't first make me go. And obviously, so my history is this. I first went into recovery in 1987. That was the first time I stepped into the rooms of AA. I like to say that at that time in my life, I just audited the class. You know what I mean? So
it did not appear on your transcript.
It did not appear on my transcript. I got no grade. And there were some very understandable reasons for that. I was a young man. I was showing up in rooms with guys that were like 68 years old, and I'm like 27. This is also in a time when the conversation around addiction was just not being had culturally. There were a lot of factors. But I got enough of the program that I stopped drinking, did not touch a substance for 23 years or 30 years. But I also didn't go to meetings, did not work a program of recovery. I was just abstinent, right? Then there was 2020. And COVID and a number of other factors and prescription medications, not opioids, but some others that took over my life and ended up in treatment. And then I didn't talk about it publicly. I'm actually a kind of a private person, so I'm not a guy who's going to go on Instagram like, hey, I relapsed, here I am in treatment. It's like, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. It also didn't feel like something I was really excited to talk about with people, for obvious reasons. A couple of years in, I was like, gulp. I really kind of need to write a book about what I've learned, I've had enough time between myself and then that I don't feel like I'm leveraging a failure to make myself into something great, And that was the catalyst.
So one of the things that I said on social media as I was advertising this and inviting people here was that, do you want to hear a good word? We need a good word in life today. How are the 12 steps a good word for us?
Wow. Yeah. So I love that the purpose of the 12 steps is pretty simple, but it's surprising to people. Like most people think when they see the steps, it's like, this is how they get those alcoholics to stop drinking, right? And I thought when I first went to an AA meeting, they're just going to teach me how to drink with confidence. You know what I mean? Like here's how you drink with confidence. Like here's how to stop, and it's like, that's not exactly what happened, right? The purpose of the steps is to facilitate a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it expels our need to use an external solution to solve an internal problem. Because external solutions, that's like going to the hardware store to buy bread. Like you're just shopping in the wrong place, right? And eventually, the external solution becomes a bigger problem than the problem it was trying to solve, right? And so sometimes, BJ, you'll hear people say, oh, that Ian, he's got a drinking problem. Or, that Bob, he's got a porn problem. Or this guy's got a workaholism problem. And I'm like, no, I understand why you're saying that, but actually, I have a drinking solution. And so has a workaholism solution. And so when you put it in that light, what it does is there's a big shift inside from being kind of us, them, and a little finger waggy to like compassion arises like, oh, that was your solution. That actually was a symptom of the problem, but not the problem. And the steps offer a way to have this spiritual experience that renders the need for an external solution unnecessary. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting, but I happen to be familiar with the 12 steps, but maybe not everybody in this room knows what they are.
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful to recite them so that...
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, or at least globally what the 12 steps are.
So let me maybe just for the sake of time say, and help me if you can add to this. The steps we might be able to bucket, right, this way. The first 3 steps are all about mending and deepening our relationship with God as we understand God. 4 through 7 are about mending and deepening our relationship with ourselves. 8 and 9 are about mending and deepening our relationship with others. And then 10 through 12 would be about how do you maintain a lifestyle that cultivates growth and health in each of those 3 domains of your life moving forward. So I know we got some, I was about to say, my name is Ian, and I was an alcoholic, and see how many people went, hi, Ian, and then we would all know who's in.
Right. Yeah.
Everyone could be outed at the same moment. How awesome would that be? But I can see some nods in the room, right? That's about as clear a way as I know how to break up the steps so that people understand how the process works. Or that's just one way of looking at how the process works.
And in terms of, we are all addicts. We all have some connection, vulnerability. It isn't so much, is this person drinking too much? Or am I drinking too much? Or are you drinking too much? It is, what is the numbness that someone is seeking from an outside source? What is life? Life is hard. Life is really hard, and it's amplified by alienation, by struggle, by loneliness. When I look at my own family's experience, it seems to me that any one of us at any moment could become terribly addicted to something, and any one of us has the access, the ability. I won't say overcome it. I think that's too muscular.
Yep.
But I think the ability within them to access grace, to access something that allows them not only to survive being taken over by these anti-numbing things, but also, and this is the 12 steps, to grow and find, is enlightenment the right word? I don't know. To find spiritual...
I think as a Christian, actually, enlightenment's a great word.
Okay.
I think, for example, Christianity is an enlightenment religion. In the sense...
On our better days.
well, but most people associate that word with Eastern religions.
Right.
But actually, if the goal of Christianity is to be increasingly filled with the light of Christ, then that's what I mean by an enlightenment religion. Now, I'm just going to push back on one thing you said. Because
I hope you would.
And because we're Irish Catholic, we can do that.
That's right. Meet me at the elbow room.
Not only do we have vulnerabilities to addictions, it's too late. You're all addicts. Trust me. Would anyone in here like to not cop to the addiction of control?
Right.
Could any of us who've read the same Bible that I've read actually say to themselves, I don't have an addiction to self-centered, self-interested patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving on a day-to-day, could any of us say that? Now, some of us, granted, I'm actually grateful that I had, my wife once, toward the end of my last rodeo, she said to me, you have become a socially indigestible person. As we're getting in the car to go to the airport, to go to treatment. So you may not, the benefit of being an alcoholic or a drug addict is you eventually, it becomes a public problem. And everybody can see it. I actually feel sort of sad for the people who have more hidden addictions that have the same kind of soul sickness, but have nowhere to go.
I was going to ask about that, Ian. That's actually one of my questions here, is how do people who have more subtle symptoms, how do they get help? How do they wake up? How do we help them wake up?
Yeah.
Can we?
Well, I just think the spiritual journey largely is about shedding attachments. And that's what the early church mothers and fathers would have called addictions. They wouldn't have called, that's a more 20th century clinical term. They would have called them attachments. These have been around a long time. But it's not like addiction's a new thing. 1,600 years ago in the desert, a bunch of monks were hanging around trying to live lives of austerity and to get away from their addictions, their many addictions, to approval-seeking, perfectionism. What's your thing? These are repetitive patterns that they do have mood-altering effect, and they have repeated negative consequences. Now, to your point, there are 300 different, at least 300 that I know of, 12-step fellowships, from Spenders Anonymous to Betters Anonymous to, gambling, and you name it, right? Just go online. You may find your thing, right? If you're codependent, which I know very few people, I know very few people who aren't codependent. Honestly. Anyone could benefit from a CODA meeting, going to a Codependent Anonymous meeting. Now, If that's not your thing, you could definitely read this book and find a program of recovery and actually do it with 5 other people for 14 weeks. Just like get together as a workbook, 120 pages. Just have at it, And thank you. Well done. That's a big premise of the book.
I turned off my microphone. One of the things that was really new to me was looking at it gave a vocabulary, and I don't know if this is 12-step vocabulary or your insights on the kind of Rosetta Stone addictions that are down beneath that really are the foundation that just alcoholism picks up on, and things like resentment.
Oh yeah,
that was a powerful, powerful word. That what are these things that kind of rumble in our hearts before we pick up our first drink or spend our first time spending a weekend working in the office?
Actually, just give me the book,
yep.
And I'll just read a portion of the book.
Please.
Make it simple. So look at you underlining this book.
I did that for you.
Oh. Wow, that's a nice feeling. The Buddhists have a word that perfectly describes the human condition, dukkha. In Pali, an ancient language used in some Buddhist texts, this word translates to suffering, the source of which is a vague underlying feeling of unease, inner lack, dissatisfaction, and inquietude. But I prefer how author and teacher Ethan Nichtern translates the word dukkha as the feeling of not at home. Not since Adam and Eve were banished from Eden and the prodigal son flipped off his father, have any of us really felt at home in the world. We are fractions yearning to become whole numbers. We have unnameable desires and unattended sorrows we don't know what to do with. We are filled with an inconsolable longing for what Ann Porter calls that far-off and half-forgotten country we half remember, and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis describes as a land we know exists but have never yet visited. In short, you and I were made for paradise, but we feel like we're stuck in a Motel 6 on the border between heaven and earth. And so I think that's the quickest way of describing the spiritual existential dis-ease that's just fundamental baseline in the human experience. Human beings don't like distress, right? We are averse to suffering and drawn to pleasure. And so, listen, it should make perfect sense to us that we would look for fixes. Like, well, there's no shame in this book. This book will not shame you. Like, bad dog. It's like, no, I get it, dog. like it makes total sense that you are drawn to outside solutions to that internal problem. And that internal problem is beautifully articulated not only by the Buddhists, but by Christians. Like, this is what people living in a riven world do. But we don't have to. And we can find healing. And the steps provide a path, not the only path, but a path that has been proven, it has proven efficacy with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives. Yeah.
And shame, that accesses the same kind of addictions as resentment, doesn't it?
Well, people can certainly get caught in a sort of a uninterrupted circuit of shame. And the steps do a really great job of confronting that head on. Particularly steps 4 and 5, where 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. This is where we basically have to come clean with another human being and say, this is all the you-know-what I have done, and I have thought, and I have felt. And you do that with a person, and they're very unimpressed. Like you think that this person's going to go, oh my word, you are horrible. And they basically, I always tell people when I'm listening to their 5th step, right? They are telling me stuff about affairs and all the things they've done that have been underwriting their addictions for years. And they'll go, I am the worst of all sinners. And I am like, don't flatter yourself. Like, really? Like, trust me, I know plenty of people who are much worse than you, including St. Augustine of Hippo.
Oh my gosh, that guy.
Right?
Right, yeah.
I mentioned in the book another saint, a woman who I swear probably had conjugal relationships with everything that wasn't secured to the floor, right? Early on, right? Like, it's just, don't flatter yourself, right? And what happens when we begin to puncture the ego, and in a healthy, good way, and we begin to learn, oh, I'm just another bozo on the bus. I'm actually not that special. I have not done anything that creative or interesting. I've just done it in my own unique little way.
Right. And that's threatening and freeing to be able to see both of those.
Yeah. That's part of it. That's a big part of the spiritual awakening, actually.
Only for a moment, to this lady's point, since we've only articulated fifth.
Okay.
Now we don't know what's before that. Get into the fifth. Could you just read the steps so people at least hear what we're talking.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, we'll hear a little bit more of the steps. While he's looking
I just don't want to, I know them by heart, but I actually also don't want to get a word out of place because there may be some 12-step fundamentalists in the room.
Right.
And I don't. So here we go. Step 1, we were powerless over blank, that our lives have become unmanageable.
Admitted.
What did I say?
We admitted we were powerless.
Admitted we were.
Oh, yeah, we admitted we were powerless. I've already done it wrong. Dorothy, character defect right there,
But
right?
it's very important.
I understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
yeah.
So step 1, we admitted we were powerless over blank, that our lives have become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, where is step 7? Humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics or fellow sufferers and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Yeah?
Feels like the beginning of a meeting.
Yeah. The floor is open.
Frederick Buechner talks about the fact that a lot more has gone on in church basements than has upstairs for a lot of years. What do the 12 steps have to say to the church? I know, we don't have that much time.
Yeah. Oh, boy. So there's a story in the book about a guy, this is not his real name, his name is Gene. Gene was the pastor of a large evangelical megachurch, and he also had a secret drinking problem. And I live in Nashville, so this is not an unusual story, right? And so I met Gene. The story is, as often, may not be funny to you, but if you were in the rooms of recovery, this would be a funny story. He shows up for church one Sunday. He's now morning drinking, right? So he shows up to church potted, right? And he gets up in the pulpit, and he's like slurring his way through the sermon, right? And the elders figure out, right? He's either having a stroke or he's sozzled, right? So they take him out, and they did the very thing you would hope a church would not do. They fired him. I mean, rather than get him help and realize, this is what humans do with their pain sometimes, so let's get him some help, right? They fire him. So I'm with him in a church basement, maybe 6 months after that. And he said, Ian, how is it possible that I have experienced more love, grace, kindness, humility, acceptance, welcome, and healing and transformation in the basement of the church more than I ever have upstairs in the sanctuary. Now, to be clear, I love the church. I am a priest. So this is not, I'm not on a bandwagon. I mean, the church is awesome, right? It has its problems like every human community has, right? That's just natural. But the church has a lot to learn from those folks in the basement that they often complain leave cigarette butts in the parking lot. Right? Like, is that your biggest problem? But you really ought to come downstairs and check out the miracles that happen routinely downstairs, because they could also happen upstairs more often if some of the principles that are practiced downstairs were brought upstairs. Now, I could go into a long thing about ecclesiology and all the different ways that churches could be impacted, But suffice to say, let me just say this. People tend to form stronger bonds when sharing their brokenness than when sharing their beliefs. And so what in part the church could learn is, how do we normalize vulnerability and the sharing of human brokenness upstairs so that people could actually experience grace not as a theological abstraction, but as a living possibility and reality in their day-to-day lives? I got a Baptist in the room. I love a good amen. Yes, ma'am.
When you talk about the upstairs part of it, one thing that I found, and I'm 26 years in church.
Yay!
Uninterrupted. One of the things that I have found is the church does not teach us about the spirit within, the connection. We identify with the human form and not with the spiritual form. But for me, what the 12 steps and other programs have done, it helped me to see my spiritual self.
Yes.
So I've been working on a PhD in youth. We have to go over all of those terms that we. Okay, just like I know when you said, I love that you brought the addiction part that we're all addicts. It turns a lot of people off to say that, but in essence, we are addicted to living.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
26 years?
It'll be 27, May 28.
Oh my goodness, 27. I'm not even 27 years old yet. That's incredible. Well, and it is not a linear journey. No spiritual journey is linear, although the 12 steps to the outsider certainly sounds like a do 1, do 2, do 3, do 4.
Yeah.
And this is a story that begins with a relapse.
Yes.
This is a story that begins with great vulnerability, and I appreciate you sharing that, and appreciate that at the beginning of a launch moment, that must be a great moment of vulnerability for you. Did I just project something it may not be? So it's whenever we put something out in the world and just tell a story.
Yeah.
But the question that I wanted to ask was, the reality of the journey is one that takes bravery and courage every day. And sometimes it seems like something's working against us within us. Your phrase, which I thought was hilarious, is we think we're doing the 12 steps. Meanwhile, our addictions are doing push-ups at the gym.
Anyone who's been in meetings has heard that expression many times.
Okay, that was new to me. That was new to me.
No, but it's...
How do there is always pressure. I don't know if we say pressure against the journey or pressure to fall back, or addictions get stronger even as we do our work. How do we navigate life when that is often the reality of the addictions we're coping with?
Yeah. Well, let's just be honest and say that everything in culture mitigates against a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
Whether you self-identify as an addict or not, right? It is hard to be a spiritual person in the world, right? There are forces all the time, cultural forces, all manner of forces that are militating against our advancement in that regard, right? Our progress, our development, right? Our spiritual lives. I think one of the things you said about the linear thing is interesting. I have a great sponsor, and I talk a lot about sponsor Steve in the book. And he is funny. He's a country guy. He is from the country of Tennessee. I am from Greenwich, Connecticut, okay? And you could not be less country from Greenwich, Connecticut, right? And we are like this, right? And he says stuff to me all the time. Like when I first came in, he was like this. Well, Ian, we are well past any conversation about you changing you. That kind of stuff. And I'll be like, wow, I've been a therapist for 30 years and I don't, all that for $1. You know, that's pretty good. You know, and, but he said something really interesting. He said, yes, in the beginning we do the steps in, you know, one after the other. We work through the steps. You may do that more than once. He said, but you know, once you've been in it for a bunch of years, the numbers fall away. And you are now living in the ecosystem of this way of life, right? Now it's not something you have to think about as much as it's something you're reflexively drawing on hour by hour. I got to work a step 3 right now. Look what I did. Got to do a 6 and 7. You know what I mean? It's like you're just kind of naturally, once you've been schooled through them, they actually become warp and woof of your person. And going to meetings and doing the work keeps it that way, right? Just keeps it that way. Because we all have good forgetters. You know what I mean? Like we all got good forgetters. So we just keep showing up, doing the work, and then we begin to see transformation versus reformation, which I talk about in the book, begin to break out. And then it even surprises us.
Flesh that out a little more. Transformation versus
I
reformation.
think, particularly, I can only speak from a Christian perspective, right? But many Christians, I think, operate with this belief that they have to fix themselves. I mean, they know about grace, but they're always on this sort of, and that is reformation, right? I'm going to reform myself, right? And unfortunately, how's it going? Right? I mean, it's just a pattern of frustration and shame. I cannot, what does Paul say? I don't understand why I keep doing the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I want to do, right? It's just, that's a bottom, by the way. That's reading a bottom, you know? And yet we just keep at it. I'm going to work on myself. The steps are not a self-help program. Because if your help, like I always say, if yourself could have helped yourself, wouldn't yourself have done it by now? So what it is a program of transformation, meaning that some external force to you has to do for you what you cannot do for yourself. That's transformation. That's grace. That's the surprise for me on the journey, which is if I just show up and do the work, I'm no longer taping fruit to trees. Now it's just coming up through the root system and the sap, and you go, oh my gosh, look at me being unselfish. I had no idea I could do that, you know? And things just start to happen, and you're like, that's God at work in me, doing things that I've been trying to do my whole life to be a good Christian without my having to actually do a lot of effort. You know?
Thank you. I'm going to turn to our congregation audience for questions. We have one.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the 12 steps come from the principles of the Oxford group.
Yes.
So the whole 12-step movement started from a religious movement that kept the same principles. They just had to number them into steps. And I can't remember specific. I remember some things about it, but that's where the 12 steps originated from people who weren't alcoholics trying to get closer to God.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The Oxford movement, or the Oxford group, I believe had 6 steps, and I think was 6, right? And then 4 absolutes. And then the beautiful thing about what Bill Wilson did, right, is he was so concerned, actually primarily in the initial stages, about that it would keep Catholics out. And that the Catholic Church would begin to forbid their members from participating in AA if it was continued to be aligned with an evangelical Christian movement. And then, of course, it would have left out Jews and Hindus and everybody, and agnostics and atheists. So he actually made the steps, regardless of spiritual orientation, one could come in and enjoy all of their benefits. God bless him for that. Yeah.
So I was going to AA meetings about a little over 20 years ago, and at the time I identified my issue as addiction to the internet. And so I would go to AA meetings and say that, and people would laugh at me, but they were accepting. But then about 10 I stopped doing that because I got bored. And about 10 years later, I got a diagnosis of ADHD. And I just wonder, there's so many similarities. I just wonder what you would say about the sort of intersection between everybody getting an ADHD diagnosis now and everybody being addicted.
You know, I don't know how to answer that question, except to say that it is not unusual for addicts to have, comorbidity or other issues in play that are dancing with their addiction. And that could be lots of different things: depression, generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD, bipolar disorder, or whatever, addictions often don't dance alone, right? They come with litter mates, and so that wouldn't surprise me. By the way, internet and gaming now, I think the internet is now included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as a full-blown addiction. So, and others are on the way, I think, as well.
Anna, I was just wondering if you could say a few words about the spiral journey that we can be on if we grew up in an alcoholic home. I'm in my 80s, and I feel I'm still on that spiral journey.
Yeah.
Trying to understand my dad and the whole impact on our family.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that because my dad, the year that I first got sober, my dad died of alcoholism. I never saw my dad sober a day in his life. He never once enjoyed. He was actually one of those poor unfortunates, and he had other mental disorders that I think made it virtually impossible for him to find sobriety, to be honest with himself, sufficiently to find sobriety, God bless him, I look forward to seeing him sober. And I'm 64 years old, and just saying that makes me teary, there was a Harvard study done on happiness recently, and one of the things that it pointed out was few, if anything, will lead to more sorrow in a person's life throughout their lives than to grow up with an addict. And so we do go on a journey of, in groups like Adult Children of Alcoholics, it's a 12-step program among others, to unwind ourselves from the momentum of that illness. The thing I know about my father now is he did not voluntarily stand in a line at the beginning of his life that said, I want to become an addict who hurts his children and his wife and never be able to work. And you know what I mean? Like, he did not make that choice. Right? I'm not giving him a pass on his behavior, right? It's a funny line. But what I am saying is my dad was a sick man. And as a sick man now, the steps have helped me. And this is important. It wasn't therapy. It was the steps that helped me forgive my father. So for me, the steps have been that incredible journey of understanding and of developing empathy and compassion for someone who was very unkind. Yeah, forgiveness. And forgiveness is a big part of the journey of healing in recovery. Yeah, Dorothy.
Could you speak about the role of groups like Al-Anon and Narconon, and the idea that if you grow up in a family in which there's addiction, even if your grandparents were alcoholics, that it changes the whole family dynamic, and you need to work on your own behavior. Yeah.
So now I'm going to talk on the other end. Right? I'm what you call a triple winner. That's what my friend Ashley likes to call us, triple winners. I had a parent who was an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. And I have a son. And by the way, he has given me permission to speak publicly about his journey, so not outing anybody. My son is now just graduating after 2 years in sober living in Los Angeles. We went on three tough rodeos in treatment for cocaine addiction. And he was at Brown University at the time, super smart kid, doing great, blah, blah, blah. As you know, addictions are no respecter of intelligence or of social background, right? It's not like, it only, we're all open, right? And so my wife, who I wish was here to answer this question, is an Al-Anon ninja, right?
Did you go to Al-Anon?
I did not go to Al-Anon. As a little guy, as a young man, I remember going to a couple of Al-Teen meetings, but they were really goofy at the time. The one I went to, anyway. I'm not saying they're all that way. The particular just didn't take, right? Al-Anon not only really saved my marriage, but it saved our son in a way because, it was a major player in that salvation story because, my wife and I had to go on a journey of realizing that if we wanted to help our son, we needed to work on ourselves first. And we couldn't save him. And we had to do the most counterintuitive work in parenting that I know of letting go. And of not being addicted to him. And what Al-Anon taught us was to live with a loving detachment so that we could be available to him, but not enabling or, getting all wrapped up in the vortex of his insanity, right? So I would encourage anyone who is in relationship, either as a child, a partner, a parent, a friend. I've just seen how that program, I've seen the healing work of what it does firsthand and experienced it firsthand, yeah.
One last question.
I'm sorry to take the last question because this may take me about an hour and a half to get through. Very simply. No question. No pressure. Okay. I love what you've been saying, but the problem I have, which I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I haven't done anything about it. I lost the best thing that ever happened in my life 15 years ago. My wife passed away.
I see.
And for those of you who have seen our face around here before, we've been going to this church for 30 years and been the Episcopal side of it for about 50 years. What I get angry at is, especially when it first happened, people will come up to me and say, well, we heard about your wife. I'm so sorry about that, yada, yada, yada. God has a plan for her. I get so angry. I haven't hit anybody yet because I know you're bigger than I am, so I'm not going to try it. I know that's my reaction is wrong. And I'm not saying, is that going to fix, is there something in there that's going to fix it? But I do know I need some direction. So really quickly, am I overstating it? Because whenever I hear it, I get angry. And I don't know what to do with that anger. And what I have done is go home, where I had a large tree in my backyard and a baseball bat, I just beat the hell out of that tree. And I would do that for I don't know how many years. But I stopped. Where should I reach out? And if you're whatever you think, is there some... Listening to you, I could hear a few things that struck. Please.
Buy the book. Start with the book. Start with the workbook. Gather some friends around you to talk about it, because resentment is the secret sauce for a lot of our addictions. So start there. It's very simple. Start with the book.
Can I just make one comment, though? What's your name again? Dale? Yes. All right, Dale. First of all, thank you for your vulnerability. Mm-hmm. You just started.
Right?
You just started. Well, yeah, I did pay for 3 rounds of treatment. Okay, so I'm just, I'm trying to get my retirement back. But for everyone's sake, right? We all just had an experience, right? So we were just blessed with someone sharing the truth of their own experience of brokenness, and right, with anger and sadness and grief and trying to figure out, how do I navigate this world given these givens of my life? And no one in the room went, oh, geez, oh, boy, right? No one said, I'll pray for you. You know, right? Yeah, I would, but I've got an appointment next August I'd like to make. But really, right, we just had a moment. And those kinds of moments, like, I tell a story in the book about a meeting I was at once. I'll be very quick because I know you got another service, right? But there's a story in the book I tell about a woman who gave a story. This is many, many, many years ago at a meeting in Connecticut. And this was a very hoity-toity meeting, right? This was a leaves in the pool meeting, as we like to say. That's what people complained about a lot. And just a lot of very wealthy people. And this was a not wealthy person sharing their story, and it was brutal. It was one of those stories that everyone was like, right, just couldn't have gotten worse. And just when it got worse, right? And at the end of it, it was a speaker meeting, and nobody, most people clap and cheer at a speaker meeting, and then they share how they connect with their story with your story. And it was dead silent. Like people didn't know how to respond, and she's just standing there naked for about 4 or 5 seconds while we're all like, wow. And there was this old heiress in the room. And she had been in there. She knew Bill Wilson. This was maybe 1987, 88 when this happened. And she was in the back of the room, and this woman finished telling her story, and she goes like this. She goes, the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
And everybody in the room went, thanks be to God. Just out of habit, right? And the beauty of that story is that is how church should be. Your life is a gospel of sorts. It is a story, hopefully, of good news or news becoming good, right? And we should treat those stories as sacred text. Moments like that are moments where we should go, the word of the Lord, and thanks be to God. And who's next? You know what I mean? Like, okay, who would like to share next,
Thank you, Ian, for taking one of the most challenging realities of human existence and finding good news in it, and even for concluding us on that. So I want to thank all of you for being here. Many of you are from the wider community, and we're so grateful that you're here with open hearts to make this a really sacred moment. I want to thank Lois for being part of making this happen and bringing her own experience. And Ian, I want to thank you for your work and for the book that you've written and for sharing this moment with us. We're so glad you're here.
If you want to know more about Ian, check out his podcast, Typology, which is about the Enneagram. Will you close us with your benediction that you usually do on Typology?
Oh, yeah.
And before you do, I'm just going to mention pancakes are that way, books are that way, church is that way, bathroom is that way. But you can purchase books, and Ian will be signing books afterwards, immediately following. So, Ian.
Yeah. All right. Well, brothers and sisters, may you have love, may you have joy, may you have peace, may you have healing, may you have rest. Amen.
Amen.